All right, good morning. Let's get this started. How's the sound? If anybody wants to throw me a comment. Last week I was fighting some reverb. I never know which speaker's turned on, but I think we're good. Victoria, if you're ready, if you want to hit share on your screen, I can get your PowerPoint up. Just a couple announcements. All our videos and slideshows of the last 3 weeks are on the county website, so if you missed any, please check those out. Today is a big one, theory of taxation. But first, we've got a special guest, Victoria Yarbrough from the City of Sierra Vista, the Assistant City Manager there, and we've got her slideshow up. So Victoria, if you're ready, do you want to go ahead and get started? And I'll be right here as well.
Sure, Dan, I'm ready to jump right into it. You hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
All right, so when Dan and I talked about this and kind of strategized over the past couple of weeks, we thought a really good place to start for today would be how the city and county work together. And even though we are separate governmental entities, there are a lot of partnerships and a lot of things that we do together and need to do together, especially being the two largest governmental entities in a county the size of, what, the state of Connecticut, Dan?
Something like that, 6,000 square miles.
Yep, we're pretty large. So there's a lot of things that we need to do together. And that's why I titled my presentation today, We're in it together. So this is just a snapshot of the partnerships and intergovernmental agreements that we have together. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's pretty comprehensive. I started today with the Southeastern Arizona Communications Center, and that is our regional 911 dispatch center, and that's something that took well over 10 years or so to get together. And Sierra Vista and Cochise County are the two major partners in CCOM. And that took, again, a lot of work over many years and a lot of work on behalf of the city, a lot of work on behalf of the county administration, Sheriff Daniels, working with the state, working with private donors in order to make that happen. So truly a team effort and a lot of work. And so today that CCOM has been up and running we're about to start our third year here. And it is combined 911 dispatching, not just for Cochise County and Sierra Vista, but Huachuca City is a partner, Tombstone's a partner. We have different fire districts, Fry Fire District, Whetstone Fire District, Palominas Fire District, the National Park Service has joined. We also have a private ambulance company, Healthcare Innovations, which recently joined, and seeking new partners. So eventually the vision for CCOM is to dispatch for hopefully all cities in the county someday, and we're working towards that. So that's been a major partnership in the works for quite a long time. We also share a municipal court agreement, and that's a key one for the city and really an efficiency and budget savings for the city. And the thought behind that is that the county has to operate the court system, and the city, some cities have their own magistrate court, but it makes more sense financially speaking for the taxpayers and for the city to partner with the county to provide those municipal court services. And so that's a very important one for us, and it's something that Dan and I have gotten to work on closely here recently and will continue to work on in the future. But we contract with the county to provide our court services. The Cochise County Tourism and Economic Council is a somewhat unique partnership that has been in the county for many years. And what that council does is it used to be all cities in the county. I think that's changed a little bit recently, but all of the cities and the county got together and said, you know, we're stronger together if we work to promote the region as a whole. And so they have, again, gone through some changes recently, but they we all pay into the council to hire staff and promote the county as a whole, and then to an extent the individual members. And that's been important and around for quite a while. And they do a really good job and have recently, the economic part has been new recently, but recognizing that tourism and economic development go hand in hand. We have a lot of environmental partnerships with the county that go back many years, and not just with the county, but Fort Huachuca and other partners. And those would be the Cochise Conservation and Recharge Network and the Upper San Pedro Partnership. And they're separate organizations, but kind of closely tied together, where the USPP focuses more on sustainable long-term water needs, and the Cochise Conservation and Recharge Network acts as an implementer of projects, primarily projects that are in the county, but benefit the county and the city, ultimately Fort Huachuca, other partners. And so that is a key partnership between the city and the county to promote overall conservation, water conservation, other environmental considerations together, because that is one that we absolutely could not do without each other. Then we share a number of professional services, and by professional services, I mean things like attorneys, things like consultants, and especially again when it comes to water and environmental issues, some of our issues are the same or very closely tied together. And so it makes financial and economic sense to partner and share the cost on those, so it's not a greater cost for one or the other of us. We do share a water attorney, and then we share consultants, especially for supporting Fort Huachuca, because Fort Huachuca is an employer that is, it's our largest employer here in Sierra Vista. So obviously that's very important to us, but it's also important to the county. So we share the cost of some of those services. And two things that I didn't put on the list, but I think are important to mention are the library district. And we're going to get into a little bit more on funding here real soon, but the library district isn't something that we have a written partnership or intergovernmental agreement on, but something that is unique in our corner of the state and our corner of the country here is the way that we handle the library district and how the library district supports the libraries in the county. And many of the libraries that are in the county, such as Sierra Vista's public library, are independent and funded by the city they're in. But the county library district works to keep all of them, not just keep all of them connected, but operate some of the major services that would cost the individual libraries a lot of money to operate on their own. And they do that by operating the county-wide circulation system, which is what, when you check out a book or you go onto the website, or what you can see what books the library has, whichever one you go to, that's the circulation system. So it's a major software system that would cost a lot of money for each individual library to operate on their own. So then not only does that tie all the libraries together, but there have been some recent really amazing developments thanks to our awesome county librarian and our awesome library managers like we have here in Sierra Vista. But you can now use your library card at any library in the county. So if you have a Sierra Vista card, you can go to Huachuca City, you can go to Bisbee, you can go to Douglas, and use it there. So things like that. And then the county does a lot, the county library does a lot more to support all the other libraries, but that's just one more example of unique relationships we have here, especially being in a rural county, how we work together. The final thing I want to mention before I move on to another slide here is an animal shelter. So it's been in the news a little bit, and we're still working on it, but one of a potential project that the city and the county are working on together is the possibility of a regional animal shelter. And so we are in a research phase right now on what would a regional shelter look like, what would the cost be to build it, how many animals could it reasonably hold, before we move into a design phase. And so after we do this needs assessment here, the city will be going back to the county and we'll be sitting down and discussing, you know, does this make sense for the city and the county? What's the cost? What are the benefits? But that's just one more example of how the city and the county work together on partnerships that benefit the community and ultimately save taxpayer dollars. So wanted to talk real quickly. I'm in no way going to talk about everything on here, but I thought it was important just to dive briefly into the differences in revenues to a city versus the county and where our revenue comes from on the city side. And Dan is more than welcome to chime in on how this might look different on the county side. But this is a snapshot out of our budget book on our three major revenue sources as a city, and this is our actual proposed fiscal year 21 budget. And as you can see, what I've highlighted, city sales tax is the largest portion of our budget. We expect approximately $19.5 million in city sales tax next year. Our second largest revenue stream as the city is state shared revenue. And so what that is our portion based on the city's population of state sales tax, state income tax, vehicle licensing, and then the highway user revenue fund, which is your gas taxes coming back, and that goes to street maintenance. But that is a substantial portion of our revenue stream and very much affected by what is currently going on with the pandemic and revenues being affected around the state, especially income tax. We expect that to be affected for a few years because the income tax we receive one year is actually from the previous year. So you can imagine 2020's income tax, especially the tax filing date being moved back to July, is going to substantially affect our stream for next year and then most likely the following year as well. So as far as the revenue streams go, the pandemic's actually going to affect us in that respect for probably 2, 3, even 4 years. And then grants is especially important this year because we are getting a Arizona CARES Act distribution amount of approximately $4.9 million for the money that was distributed to the state to address pandemic-related issues. So that money is budgeted in there, and without knowing what other stimulus packages could be coming this year, we budgeted an additional $4 million in that account in anticipation of some additional money that might come, because in Arizona and for a city, once we pass our tentative budget, that is the cap for our spending for the year. And although we can change things within it, we cannot go over that. So we over budgeted a little bit there just in case we get some additional revenue throughout the year. And then finally, the property tax that I highlighted in blue there, I highlighted it even though it's a really small percentage of our overall budget, because there are always a lot of questions on property taxes and how your property tax is split up between various places that it goes. And this is one major difference between the city and the county. And I'll show you on the next slide here kind of how it splits out. But property taxes for the city are actually a very, very small percentage of our overall budget. And you can see right there, 0.43% of our budget's actually property tax, not even quite $375,000. So we are limited as a city in how much property tax we can collect each year in terms of if we were to raise it. The state legislature a few years ago changed how much cities can increase their property taxes. So we are limited in that. And I do want to say there are no property tax increases for next year. Council is not considering it at all, but just for information and perspective, that is how property taxes work for the city. So my final slide here, just to finish up on property taxes, is our rate for next fiscal year is 0.1106 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. So that means that if you have a home that is valued at $100,000, your city portion of your property tax bill is only $11.06 per $100,000. So that's not much. And the postcard that you get now that shows you exactly what's in your property tax is really informational and really important. And as a government finance nerd, I find that really exciting. But you can see how proportionally your property tax bill is split out in this graphic right here. And although I'll say these numbers are not exact because I pulled this graphic from a previous year, the proportions are still correct. The majority of your property tax dollars go to the school district. The second biggest portion goes to the county, and it is a much greater revenue stream for the county than it is for the city. You also have a significant portion that goes to Cochise College, then a little portion that goes to the state, and finally, by far the smallest portion actually goes to the city. So it's not a major revenue stream for us, but it is for the county, and it absolutely is for the school district and Cochise College. So that is my portion here for today. And Dan, if there's anything you wanted to talk about in there, any questions we got, that is what I was here to say.
Absolutely. Let me reverb. Hold on. Okay. I do have a question about the your revenue slide. Was that your general fund or your total?
That's total.
Okay. And then how does the income tax work? Is that passed down through the state? Is the state shared for the income tax?
Yes, that is part of our state shared revenue stream. And again, that's based on population.
Okay. I'm going to share a slide here about the revenue I was going to get to in a little bit, but I think it would be relevant. So let me share this.
You need me to stop sharing, Dan?
So this is a slide we were talking about pie charts and makeups of revenues, and I thought this was interesting. You know, everybody, the purely academic stance is for a trifecta of sales tax, income tax, and property tax. But these two were good examples where here at the county we have, you know, a third sales tax, a half property tax, and some others. But one of the ones I love the town of Oro Valley, but they scare me, and I'd be nervous working there because their sales tax is 80% of their entire revenue, and I value the pride they have in not having a property tax, but it does come with some risk.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to bring that up because we'll get there in my PowerPoint. I have two other comments about some of the IGAs that you mentioned. If I can, CCOM, I think is a great idea. And you mentioned not every city or town subscribes to it, and that's okay. But what we've built is such an amazing infrastructure that I just read that it even can serve as a backup. For Bisbee, they just built some interoperability where in case there's an issue with Bisbee's dispatch center, CCOM can always step in, and it's not for money or charges, it's just for public safety. So if there's a power outage or there's an issue there, they can just flip the switch and go right to CCOM for weeks just to keep things running. So it's another level of redundancy, not just a thing to accumulate, you know, charges from cities or towns.
Yes, and that's something that has happened fairly recently and something we're seeing. And The current director is putting in place, especially due to what everybody's dealing with the pandemic, is what if you are Bisbee or Benson or Wilcox and you happen to have one of your dispatchers go out sick? In a lot of the smaller cities, losing one or more of your dispatchers can be a huge impact. And so what do you do for backup? And so I know that Alan Smith, the CCOM director, has been working on that with various cities. And yes, it's a service we can provide countywide in the name of public safety to make sure that no city is left without 911 capabilities.
Excellent. All right, there's one more thing I said I would talk about to a few people, and I think as professional administrators that acknowledge we live in a political environment, I kind of wanted to give my thoughts on this, how we can take some academic and conceptual theories and apply them to practice. So last year, everybody that doesn't live in a cave knows there was some political frustrations with the municipal court IGAs. And as an administrator, I go, how did this happen? Not what happened, but what system did we create that allowed this to happen? And I looked back in our first lecture we had last month, we talked about fiscal federalism. And I think of that, you know, there's the push and pull between the federal and the state and local, but it also comes down to having the responsibility to provide a service and the authority to tax for that service. They need to be balanced, so that when you get an imbalance, that's when we say, oh, the state gave us an unfunded mandate. And the more I thought about the JPIGA, I think what happened is we got in a situation where we created a partnership where if we start the beginning, when a city incorporates, they have the responsibility to provide a municipal court, and then they have the authority to tax to provide it, and those are balanced. I think for a little while with this IGA, we got a little out of balance where the city was paying for a service but lost some of that autonomy with it. And I think when we changed the IGA, we brought that a little bit back in balance. You know, and it took a once in a decade situation to point out that imbalance. So that was just my thought because a couple people had asked and I said I'd mention it.
And now we get to renegotiate it, and we're gonna have a lot of fun with that.
So I don't have any questions in our queue here, and I think he answered mine. So I definitely want to say thank you for joining in the partnership, and I appreciate it. And if you want to stick around, we're going to get into the theory of taxation here.
Thanks for the invitation, Dan. I appreciate the opportunity and enjoyed doing this today. And I'm going to sign off because I have another meeting to go attend at 9:30. But thanks again for the invite.
All right, we'll talk soon. And I do have your slides, and we'll put those up on the website.
Sounds great. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Bye. All right, team. Thanks for sticking with me here. All right, class 4, theory of taxation here. I'm going to need a sip of coffee before we get into this, but this one's not going to be that long, and it's going to be pretty high level. So you won't need your thinking caps or calculators here. So we'll get into a little review from what we already talked about and how it applies to taxation, a little history of taxation, some principles of taxation, and then how we look at an individual tax and analyze that, and how we would analyze a revenue stream itself. All right, we'll review. Remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about goods from an economic stance. And the big thing that we produce is our public goods right here. And why do we produce them? Well, public goods are non-excludable, meaning anybody can use it and you don't pay to use a public good. And they're also non-rival, meaning they're unlimited. So anybody can use them no matter how many people's using them. It doesn't decrease the value of it. So, you know, that's public safety, national defense, public parks, clean air. And the biggest problem with these is because you can't charge people for them. The private market doesn't produce them. So we need to produce them as a local government. And remember, how do we do this? With tax. So we levy a tax and we pay for those goods that the private market doesn't produce. And remember, when we do this, we hurt the economy by doing it with the tax wedge. We have our supply and demand, and when we levy that tax, we raise the price, and what we see is it affects and hurts the economy. So we have that tax wedge, or as we call it, the dead weight loss in here, which is not the revenue we generate, but the actual pain and that's inflicted in the economy. So that's why we tax and what it does. But that's what we talked about in week 1. Now let's really get into the types of taxes and how they affect specific things. All right, a little history. I admit I took this graphic from Wikipedia here, but the earliest known system of taxation was back in ancient Egypt, 3000 BC, and I think these are the tax calculators and the tax collectors there, and it looks like they've got sticks, so I'm glad we don't do that anymore. So we've got tax records, back on limestone flakes or papyrus, and they used to say that the pharaoh conducted biennial tours collecting these tithes. So the earliest thing, the types of taxation, was just the tithe, which is that 1/10 contribution most of us are familiar with. Another one back then was called a corvée, and that was forced labor for those who cannot pay taxes. So if you can't pay your tithe, then you do some forced labor. And even dating back to 1500 BC in Babylon, I was reading some parables about finance, and one of the recommendations was to pay off your house, and then you'll only have to pay the king's tax, which they mean property tax. So even back in 1500 BC, there was property tax. Some other interesting historical taxes. What's a scutage? It was a medieval English tax levied on landholders to get out of military or knight service. Another one, the tallage. Medieval England and France, it's an older version of a property tax. And one of the weird ones was the Danegeld, an 11th century English tax or bribe to pay to marauding Vikings to prevent the land from being destroyed. So some interesting forms of taxation. And to fast forward to the 18th century and the birth of the United States, if we remember from a couple weeks ago, the U.S. Constitution, it provided the authority to generate taxes. And there were some caveats, but really it had limited direction. It didn't give a framework for how or why or who taxed. So really the states just began in the early history of the US with the property tax for the general fund, and that was just simply the levy. It wasn't about a rate or a valuation, it was just the levy. We're going to levy a tax to pay for this. First income tax was in the 1860s to help pay for the US Civil War, and we started slowly adding consumer sales tax as well as time moved on. And in the 20th century, we started doing things differently. We've added earmark taxes or restricted revenues, and that's like your gas tax, where we said, okay, if we're going to have a new tax, then we should spend it for a certain reason. And that's where you get those special revenue funds or restricted funds, as we've talked about. All right, principles of taxation. There's a couple different schools of thought, but the main thing that we always, is across the board, the thing that drives the theory of taxation is to broaden the base to keep the rate low. So you have to tax as many things and people to keep the rates to a minimum, opposed to taxing few things and people with high rates. So what I liken this to, one of my favorite sayings is, the car mechanic, he goes, you're going to pay me now or you're going to pay me later. And really, I appreciate where legislators are at when they say, oh, well, this group of people over here or there, or this industry is so special to me and we should give them a break on taxes and this or that. Well, somebody's going to pay. Nobody rides for free. If you give them a break, somebody else has to pay for it. So that's just remember one thing, broaden the base to keep the rate low. The most things and people paying taxes lets us keep that rate low. It's just math. All right, when we look at some economic theories, classically we talk about equity. Are taxpayers treated equitable? Is it based on your ability to pay? Should the wealthy pay more? And is the benefit of the tax in relationship to the tax paid? Are you paying a tax, then there's no benefit you see from it? And if you think back a couple weeks ago with maybe education or other redistribution taxes and programs, the benefit is that positive externality where I don't receive, if you don't have children, you don't receive a direct benefit from paying a school tax. But the positive externality of having an educated populace and workforce is valuable to the society as a whole. So that's how you make that connection within a positive externality. Modern economics, they have some different thoughts on tax theories or principles, and that could be more social equalization with more redistribution, or is a tax discriminatory? Is it favoring one group over another? And that could be, a racial group or even an industry. Regulation, are we using this to control consumption? Is this some type of tax to incentivize behavior or disincentivize certain other behaviors? On economic growth, is the tax stimulating investment or helping generate economic benefits? Those are just some high view thoughts on taxation. But as we get into the good stuff here, the meat of it, what are the factors that we actually use to analyze a tax? The biggest one is called the burden, or we call the tax incidence. And this is who pays the tax. And I want us to think about that. It doesn't mean who writes the check to pay the tax. It's who does the tax fall on. So there's a difference. If I pay for a good at a store and my receipt says I spent $10 and paid 80 cents in tax, I paid the tax. But did the burden fall on me? So let's get into that. Property tax. Okay, a homeowner pays it. The homeowner pays their property tax bill. What about a renter? The renter doesn't pay property tax to the county. They don't pay a property tax bill, but they pay rent. So does their rent go to the property owner that then pays the property tax bill? So who pays the property tax? Well, who physically writes the check to the county? Well, it's the property owner, but who's bearing the burden of that? And it's the renters too. What about your retirement, like your Social Security and your FICA taxes, which we call the payroll taxes? What, 7-point-something%? Okay, it's supposed to be 50-50, where if every check, after every pay period, you pay 7-something%, your employer pays 7-something% to Social Security. Well, who pays that? Is it 50-50? Or does the employer simply pass the tax on to the employer through lower wages? So instead of making $10 an hour, well, that's a bad example, it's below minimum wage. Okay, instead of making $20 an hour, and then I pay my 7% and the employer pays their 7%, maybe the employer instead just pays me $19 an hour and then pays their 7%. And I pay my 7%. So in effect, the employer is still paying $20 an hour, but it's $19 wage and $1 payroll tax. So who's actually paying it? What about sales tax? Okay, so when I pay at the store and my receipt says I spent $10 and paid 60 cents in tax, I'm paying it. I'm physically paying it. But is it passed on to me, or is the business absorbing it? And it comes down to the concept of elasticity. And I should have covered this in our first talk about economics, but elasticity is used to describe the effect of a good's relationship to its demand based on price. So elastic, it moves, it bends, it adjusts. So elasticity of a product means that it changes in relationship to the price. The demand changes in relationship to the price. So what that means, if you have something that's not a necessity, but a nice to have, like it's summertime, it's like a pool noodle. They're cool, but you don't actually need them. So if the price of pool noodles doubled, people would buy less of them. That means it has an elastic demand. The demand changes with price. And the opposite is inelastic. So that is something that is a good that you will always buy no matter whatever the price. So baby diapers or milk. If the cost of baby diapers or milk doubles, you're still going to buy as much as you need. So it's inelastic. So that demand won't change because it's such a necessity that you're going to buy it no matter what. So this comes down to how tax is applied and who bears the burden. So on an elastic product where demand is affected by price, what you're going to see is that the producer or the business absorbs that tax. So if you have your pool noodle for $2 and then there's a 25-cent tax, what you're going to see is that the price of the pool noodle then becomes $2.25. But that price increase is going to cause a decrease in demand. So what you're going to see is the business then sell it for $1.75 and then add the 25 cents tax. So the cost is $2. So instead of you're going to physically pay the 25 cents on your tax, but because the demand is elastic and you wouldn't buy it for $2.25, the business or producer lowered the price by 25 cents to keep the demand the same. So what happens in effect is the business absorbed that tax. It took the burden of the tax. On the opposite side is your inelastic demand. So that gallon of milk, if it's $5 and you got a 50-cent tax, it doesn't matter. You're still going to pay it. So the employer is, or I'm sorry, the business isn't going to lower the price. It's still going to be $5. If it goes to $6, doesn't matter. You're still going to pay it. So at $6 and your 50-cent tax, you're still going to pay it. So they're not going to adjust their price to match the change in demand. So really, when we talk about tax burden, it depends on the elasticity of the product. And really, there's still a lot of debate on this. It's beyond the scope of this webinar. You could probably take a whole economics class on it, but know that the burden of the tax isn't on the person that actually writes the check to pay it. All right, what about equity? This is another deep one that's controversial and debated. Okay, we have different types of equity in taxation: progressive, regressive, and proportional. Simple one is proportional. Everybody pays a flat 10%. So no matter what your income is, you're always paying a flat 10%. So as your income goes up, the amount you pay goes up, but the percentage doesn't. So that's right in the middle. Then your progressive taxes. Your taxes increase as your income increases. This is the seminal example is income tax. We all know we have tax brackets. So as your income goes up, the tax bracket you're in goes up. So as your income goes up, the percentage of tax you're paying goes up and the amount of tax goes up. So that's what we call progressive tax. The other type is regressive, and this is a little bit more hard to calculate, but as your income goes up, the share of your money that you spend on taxes go down. Or as your income decreases, the share of money you spend on taxes increases. So how we get to this is, it takes a lot of generalizations, but you can say, if you have a lower income, you're not investing and saving as much. But if you have a higher income, you may be investing and saving more. So at a lower income, like a tax paid for sales tax, so at a lower income, you do more consuming. So that tax on sales and consumables is a higher percentage of your income than someone making higher income. So, and there's different ways to look at this, like it's based on the equity of taxation in a product or an activity. There's certain products that people from different economic classes use, and others you could create a situation where an affluent person is not paying taxes on a product or activity, but a person with a lower income does these different activities that are taxed more. So you create situations where the taxation the percentage of your income changes as your income changes, but it goes the wrong way, where the less you make, the more you're paying. So that's what we call a regressive tax. Next, stability. This type of factor is really in line with economic cycles. So we all know we have economic cycles, or they call it the business cycle, peaks and troughs, up and down, but for the most part it goes up. So property tax, it's assessed once a year. The rate is set once a year. So the rate at which it changes is once a year, and you see the cycles of property tax are over decades. But your cycles of sales tax are seasonal. They're over a single year. So as we've been talking right now with the pandemic situation, stay-at-home orders, we're not worried about our property tax because that is on a decade-long cycle, and it's related to the economy as a whole, and it can only change once a year. But our sales tax is seasonal. We see our Christmas season, our tourist season, and one little issue in those causes it to change and fluctuate. So instead of seeing a change in property taxes over a decade, we'll see a drop in sales taxes in one season. So it has different type of stability. Next, what about the yield? Is the tax enough to cover the government expenses? Well, what if we had a gas tax and it was only 1 cent per gallon or something just absurdly small? It would not be enough to pay for the road repairs. So it would accomplish nothing because the tax doesn't generate enough revenue to provide the service it's there for. So those are some things to think about, and the factors we use to analyze every specific type of tax. Okay, what about some types of tax? Well, flat tax. This is just that proportional tax. And it sounds the most fair, but there's some issues with it. So, okay, let's just simplify everything. Everybody pays 20% tax. Well, that's a flat tax, but in reality, your high income earners would actually be getting a tax break compared to the tax brackets they're in now, and your low income earners would be getting a tax increase compared to what they're paying now. So that is what we call a regressive tax. What about a head tax? A head tax it's like a flat tax, but it's not a percentage, it's just a flat amount. Okay, how about everybody pays $15,000 a year in taxes no matter what? Well, for a high income earner, they could have that paid in the first 2 months of the year. Or for a low income earner, they could work all year long and never generate enough money to pay that tax and live. So it's another type of regressive tax. Then we have a couple others, an excise and ad valorem taxes. So the excise tax is per unit, not value. So this is where we see the gas tax, where you don't pay a tax based as a percentage of the price you spend, it's based on the number of gallons. And they do this with things where the price fluctuates. So the price of gasoline fluctuates all the time. So to avoid and insulate our revenue stream from the fluctuations in the world gas market, we just charge per gallon. And that per gallon translates better to the wear and tear on the road. And then the ad valorem is by value, valorem value, and that's your percentage tax, like a sales tax. So county sales tax is 0.5% based on the value of what you've bought. So if you spend $100, 50 cents sales tax. It's based on the value. Property tax, we all know this one. It's based on the value of your property. Sales tax is an ad valorem one as well. It's just a percentage of what you buy. And your income tax, that's based on what you earn. And that's, the income tax is the most progressive. And what you'll see is the sales tax is a little bit more regressive. Another type is the sin tax. And this is where we talked about the theories of taxation. Well, this is a tax to incentivize or disincentivize behavior. It's a control mechanism, and we always hear about this with alcohol, cigarettes, and the new controversial one, I think, was the sugar tax on the big soda drinks. So it's a tax on something that we think is bad to either dissuade people to do it, or if we go to the next one, the Pigovian tax it's the same type of thing, but it's to help pay for the effects of it. And that takes us back to our externalities. A positive externality is like an educated workforce or an educated population. That's my positive externality for school taxes. But the Pigovian tax is what we call a tax to help pay for the negative externalities, for example, pollution. So if there's a company that makes a product but also pollutes, they would be levied with a Pigovian tax. Then that tax will be used to help make up for the negative externalities. So if, you know, the easy cartoonish example is, okay, they're dumping sludge into a river. Well, the Pigovian tax would then be charged, and the government would use that tax money to clean the river. So that's a different type of tax that's related to your sin tax. But it takes us back to our economics we talked in week 1. That's your positive and negative externalities. Okay, so those are different types of taxes. What about revenue streams as a whole? And this is where I shared this graph with Victoria from Sierra Vista, and she has some information about Sierra Vista as well. Well, when you look at Cochise County General Fund, I've put this out a lot, you know, 37% sales tax, and then we've got 47% property tax, and then some other miscellaneous revenues. And then if I look at Oro Valley, this scares me. I go, wow, that whole chunk of the pie is sales tax. Well, as we're seeing right now with the pandemic, 6 weeks of a stay-at-home order with no bars, restaurants, and no Target runs, that could eat up a big old piece of that pie right there. So how do we look at our revenue stream, the blended revenues we have, and make sure we're in a good place? So there's some factors we use. Okay, a revenue stream should be complementary, not contradictory. So what that means is we've talked about fiscal federalism. You know, you have the authority to tax and the responsibility to provide a service. But what if our taxes interfere with each other? We want our taxes to be economically neutral as much as possible. So there's laws that you can only have so much property or primary property tax in the state of Arizona. Well, a couple examples are with Pima County and City of Tucson and the Tucson Unified School Districts. They have contradictory tax rates in so that when you add the 3 of those tax rates together, it's at the limit or greater than the statutory limit on tax for a single piece of property. So if what you've gotten a situation where these 3 entities, a property in Tucson that's in Pima County, in Tucson, and Tucson Unified School District has this combination where the taxes, the property taxes are so great that they can't be raised or adjusted anymore because the 3 organizations as independent bodies don't have a good blend of revenue. And now they've hit this inflection point where for this property, no, none of them, either of the three, can make any major changes. Or we've talked about Oro Valley right here. Oro Valley's in Pima County. Pima County's revenue stream is the opposite of Oro Valley's, where it's mostly property tax and no sales tax. But that's contradictory in this situation, because if Oro Valley wanted to start a property tax and lower its sales tax as an independent city to have a better revenue blend, they would run into the same issue, because that property in Oro Valley is already in Pima and has the high property taxes. So they are limited on the property tax they can generate because of a contradictory revenue blend in another organization or another government entity. So it's something to think about, and we'll get into the term tax cannibalization here in a few other minutes. Again, a revenue stream should be diverse. We talk about a three-legged stool of our personal retirements. Just like an organization, the ideal theoretical blend would be property tax, sales tax, and income tax. But unfortunately, municipalities can't really control that. County can't even levy an income tax, and the income tax for the city of Sierra Vista is redistributed from the state, so it's not really up to them how they levy that tax. And then it should be equitable. So when we talked about equitable in the last section. You know, we have your progressive, regressive, or proportional taxes. Well, we should have a revenue stream that as a whole isn't all progressive or all regressive. So you may have one tax that's a little regressive, a little sales tax. You may have one tax that's a little proportional. Well, maybe those balance each other out so that as a whole our revenue stream isn't inequitable. And when we talk about equitable, there's different ways to look at it. Horizontally, it's if are people treated the same if they are at similar incomes, are they paying similar taxes? Or are there weird caveats where the tax bracket between $30,000 and $40,000 gets treated differently in different cities or towns? That wouldn't be horizontally equitable. But when we talk about equitable vertically, the progressive principle is that different incomes pay different taxes. Okay, what about compliance or understandability for your revenue stream? Is it easy to understand? Well, sales tax is simple. I go to the store, I get my receipt, I go, okay, that's my sales tax. It's 7-8% as a whole. But what most people don't realize is where that goes. Half cent to the county, some to the state, some to the city. So it's not automatically available to the consumer. You have to look it up. Same thing with property tax. It's not easy to understand. I mean, next week we're going to have a class on property tax. And Victoria from Service has shared that dollar bill graphic where you can see, well, most property taxpayers don't understand where it all goes. So sometimes it's not all that easy to understand. But an ideal tax system would be easy to understand. But the more easy it is to understand, probably the less diverse and less equitable it is. What about administration? Is it efficient? How much does it cost to collect the money we generate? What if a sales tax was so burdensome and it had so many minutiae and caveats and exceptions that it spent 50% of the revenue it generated generating the revenue? That wouldn't be an effective use. So we look at our sales tax. It's relatively easy. You know, a business signs up for their EIN, registers with the Arizona Department of Revenue. The Arizona Department of Revenue collects the sales tax, sends it down to the cities and states, or the cities and counties. Okay. Well, what about property tax? Well, it's not the easiest to administer. The property needs to be assessed, and there's 9 different classes of properties, and they all have different assessment ratios. And we'll get into this, but for example, the assessor's office, you know, they do an amazing job, but it shows that there is a burden administratively to levy a property tax that we have a whole office dedicated just to assessing the property for which we're going to levy a tax. So obviously it is effective. We do generate $25 million in property tax for the county alone, and I don't know what the assessor's budget is off the top of my head, but I'm gonna look it up. I got the budget book we just passed here. So, and I'm doing this for example. I think the assessor does a great job, but for an academic purpose, I think it's important to see how this concept applies to the real example. Okay, so a property tax. The county generates, this year we've budgeted $25 million in property tax. But the assessor's budget is 2.1. So let's break out the calculator here. So 2.1 divided by 25. Go times 100. Okay, so 8.4% of our property tax is spent generating the property tax. So is that efficient? I mean, it's okay, I guess, but there's a larger picture here. The assessor assesses all these properties not just for the county. It does it for the city, the towns, the fire districts, the college technical district. So this isn't the best example, but it shows how you would go about calculating the administrative costs of a tax. So don't tell the assessor I said he's 8.4% of our revenue, because the county is only one piece of that. But it's just an example of how you would calculate that, because we do need to pay attention to, well, conceptually, how much does it cost to generate a tax? So that's what we mean with that. Okay. All right, and the last factor we look at is it responsive to interstate or international economic competition? Is our taxes a tool for economic development? And a couple examples like our wayfare tax, which I thought like a wayfare was somebody that like comes and goes. So they're like, oh, it's internet sales tax. It's coming and going. It's all over the place. It's a cool term. No, it's actually a case, I believe, in South Dakota, North Dakota versus a guy named Wayfair. But the point being is we are now allowed as a state to tax Amazon purchases, basically. So we're seeing our tax base adjust to that interstate commerce. And an example of what we're not seeing is HERF changing with respect to fuel efficient vehicles. So remember we talked about being an excise tax because it's tied to the quantity of gasoline in gallons and not the price. Well, as vehicles have become more fuel efficient over the last 20 years, as a whole, you're seeing a decrease in gallons of fuel purchased. So that's something that we still need to respond to as far as that tax base. Another example is what we call tax cannibalization. So this is what happens when you have some contradictory tax bases and they cause economic harm. An example is your income taxes. You have a federal income tax where you have your federal income tax and a state income tax. Or I'm sorry, this is a corporate income tax. So you have your federal corporate income tax and your state corporate income tax. Well, if you stack them together, you could incentivize that company to move to a different state. But what if you get in a situation where it's too great and the company says, well, I'm just going to outsource overseas? So what you're seeing there is a state corporate income tax could be so great that the company opposed to moving to another state where the federal government still gets a piece of it, the company just moves overseas. And then the state loses it and the federal government loses it. So that's what we call tax cannibalization, where a state decision cannibalizes revenue from the federal government. So they don't like that. Don't do it. So those are some things that we talk about when analyzing a revenue stream. You know, we've talked about analyzing each specific tax individually and then the stream as a whole. So actually that's all I have. So we'll keep it short to an hour today. Got some good attendees. So I'll stick around for a few and send me some questions if you have any in the chat box. And I'm here to answer some questions. I just want to thank everybody for joining and bearing with me for a topic that may not seem very interesting, but it's really important to what we do here in Cochise County and the budget office. So thank you. I'll see if anybody's got any questions, but that's all I got. All right, no questions. We'll do one little bonus thing here. Let me pull it up. We're talking about the efficiency of our property tax. Let me pull something up that might be of interest of how we calculate our property tax. So we actually have a study done that helps us look at the cost of generating property tax. Here it is. We do it with the work of a consultant, and it's called a full cost allocation plan, and it's really for indirect costs. We'll get into that. But we have this thing called a per parcel fee. So what we find out is that, so I talked about the treasurers or the assessors, but we also have the treasurer. So the assessor and the treasurer's office as a whole are dedicated to generating property tax. For the most part, it's a broad brush, but we say, okay, the total cost of service to calculate parcel valuations and collect the property tax to the county is $3 million right here. And the number of parcels assessed in all our taxing jurisdictions is 1,073,848. So we say, okay, to levy a property tax, for every parcel that we evaluate and assess and collect a tax from, it costs $2.82 right here. And down here you can see it by the jurisdiction. So, okay, City of Benson. They have 4,609 parcels, and it costs the county treasurer and assessor about $12,000 to assess that property and generate that revenue. Junior College, 127,000 parcels, at that $2.85, $360,000. We have these SLID, street light improvement districts in Naco, 378 parcels, cost us $1,066. Library district, flood control, same thing. So it's just an interesting thing how we actually come to that. We actually do that analysis and say, how much does generating property tax actually cost? Interesting fact. That's a little extra for sticking around. So thank you. And all right, no questions. That's all I got. So we'll catch you next week. And next week's the big one. We'll have the gentleman from PSPRS here and be talking about property taxes a little bit more in depth, because everybody wants to know what's up with property tax and how it's broken up. So thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.